I'm going to make a simple step bezel for this piece of chalcedony. It's lozenge shape, which is round on the bottom and on the top, so it's difficult to set it in a regular bezel setting. It's an oval, so what we'll do is get the width and the length, add those together and divide by 2, and we're working in millimeters, and that will give us the dimensions if it were a round stone. So when we have that, we can just add the thickness of our bezel wire and multiply by pi, and it'll give us our diameter that we need. Now, what we're going to have to do is measure this with our calipers from the wide spot up until the stone just starts to curve, and that way we know that our bezel will be high enough to hold it. But because we're going to use 1 millimeter wire for our step, we have to add 1 millimeter to our height. Simple. So this stone is 13.7 by 19.1. Add those, divide by 2. It comes out 16.4. We add 0.5 for our bezel wire. Multiply by pi, which is 3.14. So the length of my bezel needs to be 53.07 millimeters. Now, to make the step, we take the diameter, which is 16.4. We deduct the point. No, I'm using 1 millimeter wire, so 16.4 minus 1 millimeter times 3.14, and that will give us the exact length to cut our wire, so that we can just go ahead, we can make our bezel, we can make our step, drop it in, solder the bezel together, solder the step in, and it should be done, it should fit. So it looks like the height that I need is 3 millimeters for the bezel, so I'm going to have to add 1 because our 1 millimeter step is going to shift the stone up 1 millimeter. Yeah, so we're going to cut our bezel 4 millimeters high. So I've marked this at 4 millimeters. It's longer than I need, which is good, and I'm just going to use the shear on this. I've cut my bezel 53.1, so I'm going to just form this into a rough oval. It's annealed, as you can see, so it's quite easy to bend. So I'm just going to put the ends together so that they have enough tension that they hold themselves in place. And I'll hold it on the third hand, 1 piece of hard solder on top, and that'll do us. So I've soldered it. You can see it's still malformed. Put your join on the side and push it over your stone. Now, it should be the right size. Oop. If you're not clumsy like me, you should be able to push it over and have it fit. Now, it's a little bit small. I got my measurements off a little bit somewhere. Easy to stretch it. We'll just go over a ring mandle. And we can use a planishing hammer or a jeweler's hammer and just gently, and gently is the operative word, gently hammer it. Now this is fine silver and it'll really stretch in a hurry. So the seam on the side again, push it back over the stone. Yep. So that is a good fit. Now, the bad thing is, with my measurement off, my inside bezel is going to be a little bit off. I'm going to go ahead and make the bezel the size that I calculated for the inner bezel, and same thing. We can stretch it a little bit so that it just slips inside this. There's my inner bezel, the wire. It was a little bit wonky, so I just flattened it. And now what we'll do is we'll put the join opposite the other join and just push it in to this. It is annealed, so it should push in and fit. So we'll just squeeze it into a bit of an oval to help. Pretty good. So we just make sure that it's a nice snug fit. We don't want it tight, but we want it snug enough that it holds itself in place so that when we solder it, we'll get a good solder join. It was nice and close. I had a couple of small spots that had a little bit of a gap, so I just used the flat half-round pliers to go in and give it a little squeeze so that it fits. Now we'll put it flat on a charcoal block, and I'll shift over and show you what to do. So we're going to use quite a bit of solder for this one. Make sure that your step bezel is right at the bottom, and we're on a nice flat piece of charcoal. Flex just the inside where the wire touches. Use your flex brush, pick up bits of solder and put them right in that little area where the wire touches the bezel. So a piece of solder, a space, a piece of solder, a space, all the way around. I know it seems like a lot, but it'll make your life easier if you do this. I've got all the solder bits in. Now I'm just going to gently heat around the outside, because what we want to do is dry out the flux, but we don't want it to bubble enough that it tosses all of the solder bits off and we have to reposition them. So be patient with this. When you're drying it out, it's better to be a little bit slower than faster. So you can see I'm just going around the outside, and when I start heating it, I'm still going to just be heating around the outside. If your bits jump off, keep it warm. Push them back in with your solder pick. Yep. So now I'm about 60 mil away, and I'm just to the outside of the bezel. You don't want the heat on the top of the bezel, or when the solder flows, it'll jump up the side of the bezel. And by heating just around the base, when the solder flows, it should just flow around the base. So you can see I go inside, inside, outside. I'm just trying to get the whole thing up to temperature. And the heat reflecting from the charcoal block should bring it up to temperature. So there it's flowing. Make sure it flows all the way around. Shift it to make sure the flux doesn't stick it to the charcoal block. Quench it and have a look at the bottom. Now, what we like to see is a nice solder line all the way around, which it has. So at this point, we'll pickle it. Okay, we're out of the pickle. It's a nice solder line all the way around. You can leave that little indentation if you want, or you can sand it or file it back. This is small enough you can just put it on your file. Do this. It's thick enough that you can go all the way down until the seam is invisible, if you want. Now is the time to tidy up the join on the side and solder your little jump rings on. I just use 400 grade paper and follow the curve of this. You want to do it before you put the stone in, because you don't want sandpaper anywhere around your stone. So sand it until you can't see the join anymore. Yeah. Put your stone in, have a look, and you can see the inside of the bezel above the wide part of the stone. So this is ready to set after you solder your jump rings on or whatever else. But the bezel itself is ready to go. The rounded bottom is visible, and that's it. Simple little step bezel. I've just stepped outside my studio. This is my little scooter. It's a 1000cc Monster Ducati, and it's 22 degrees out and winter, and I think it's time to go for a ride. Ciao.